Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast. We have a blockbuster of a podcast today, a true story of someone who grew up in a radical traditionalist cult. When things go extreme, when people stop listening to the church and do things their own way and kind of take what they think is true and bring it to the extreme. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. She grew up in a cult called Feenyism up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and her name is Patricia Chadwick Walsh. And I'm excited to have her on the podcast today. She's going to be sharing her story of growing up. I mean, this is crazy, people. I mean, if you've read her book at all, it's called Little Sister, and she's going to tell you about both of her books in a second. But she talks about how she never even ate at a restaurant before 18 years old, never read a newspaper, never read a magazine, never even heard of Elvis. I mean, never heard of anything. She was separated from her parents. So this is a really sad story at the beginning, but, obviously, as her father said, you don't look at the past and you look toward the future. And that's what we're going to be doing in this story. So I'm excited to have her on the show. If you don't know her, she is a 30-year successful business investment person who has been a research analyst, portfolio manager, director of research, investment strategist, and literally everything you can imagine. Her bio is huge. I could not read it all, but she's been on CNBC, Bloomberg, CNN, and a lot of other business news channels. So, Patricia, I want to welcome you to the show, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful.
Before we get started, could you tell people about the two books real quick and what they're about?
Yes. The first book I wrote was published 5 years ago, and it is called Little Sister. And it is the story of my growing up in Cambridge till I was about 10 years old, and then moving out west of Concord in Massachusetts. And it's the story of a religious community that, in its own tragic way, morphed into being a cult. And then how I was kicked out at the age of 17. The book that is just coming out now is called Breaking Glass, which refers to the glass ceiling in the world of businesswomen. And the subtitle is Tales from the Witch of Wall Street. And again, that's kind of a humorous subtitle, but it happened to be a moniker that I was given while I was working hard on Wall Street. And it is basically a sequel to Little Sister and tells the story of how I went from being kicked out of my home, leaving my parents and my children behind when I was 17, and how I then moved forward and ended up with a wonderfully successful business life and a wonderfully successful home and family life.
Yeah, great. Wonderful. And I'm really glad to hear that, because you just never know. I know someone who grew up in a cult in China, and I won't even say what cult it was because it was so bad and so destructive. But it damaged her for a lot of years, and she needed to, get help for that. So it's really sad when people take things too far or do it in the wrong way. But maybe we can start at the beginning. Maybe you could talk about, because too many people are being led astray, from what I see, by radical traditionalism and in many different ways. And it might not be to the extreme of Feenyism and the cult of Feenyism, but I think it's injuring a lot of people. I think it's hurting a lot of people, and a lot of good people who are just trying to follow God, who are just trying to follow their faith, are being, misled. So maybe you could start at the beginning, and talk about how you got into that in the first place.
Well, I was born into the religious organization, which when I was a tiny little child, I remember very well as a place where I thought I had 60 uncles and aunts. It was a communal living. We had our meals together, but it really was founded on the basis of providing a place for Catholics going to Harvard and Radcliffe to be able to get together and talk about issues that are theological or philosophical, but it was also a social environment. And that was in the early 1940s. And it was started by a woman named Catherine Clark. And around 1943, she sought permission from the Jesuit provincial and from Archbishop Richard Cushing, who was then the Archbishop of the Diocese of Boston, to have a renowned priest, Leonard Feeney, become the chaplain. And throughout the war, he was there. And when the war ended in 1945, there were huge numbers of military men and women who were coming back and going to Harvard and Radcliffe and other colleges in the area. And Leonard Feeney was a Jesuit priest who was renowned for his verse, his essays. He had been schooled in Britain at Oxford. He was a very cosmopolitan man. And then somewhere right after the war, when all these young men and women were hoarding into the place was called the Center. It was St. Benedict Center, but they just referred to it as the Center. It began to morph into something different. And what ultimately ended up being nicknamed the Feeneyites, but the leaders of the group felt very strongly about this dogma of the Catholic faith, which said that outside the Catholic Church, there is no salvation. And they were adamant about it. And Archbishop Cushing was saying, please, 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 we want to build up ecumenism. Religions should be getting along with each other. And the group at St. Benedict Center said, absolutely not. Now, these were highly educated people from around the world. There were two men that were there from Lebanon. There was a man from Spain, people from Italy. It was very, very cosmopolitan. But they slowly became disenfranchised, if you will, because of their very radical approach to what salvation was all about. And my father joined when he was at graduate school at Boston College. He had been a naval officer in the war. And then he met my mother, who was 12 years younger than he was. And she was a convert from being an Episcopalian. She grew up on Ellery Street, right outside of Harvard Square. And Father Feeney baptized her into the Catholic Church. A few months later, my parents were engaged, then married. And a year later, I was born. And that was 1948, at which point the group of students at the center had shrunk dramatically to only about 50 people, because a lot of people had kind of moved away when Father Leonard Feeney continued to be very, very adamant in his interpretation of the doctrine of no salvation outside the Catholic Church. And suddenly they found themselves being ostracized by the religious community or the Catholic hierarchy in Boston. And
before you talk, if you don't mind me jumping in, before you talk about how the community shrunk and how it got ostracized and people were distancing themselves, just for the sake of our audience, can you talk about what was Father Feeney's radical view of there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church that got him into trouble?
Well, he held a couple of things, one of which was that the colleges, including the Catholic colleges that included, Boston College, which was a Jesuit school, were too liberal, and they were destroying the Catholicism and the true meaning of being a Catholic. They were also very, very anti-Semitic, because they said the Jews had killed Jesus and they were a cursed race of people, which was really the environment in which I was brought up. But at a certain point, Father Feeney was told he could no longer celebrate Mass in the diocese, where Cambridge was, and the Boston diocese. And then eventually he was excommunicated, at which point now they were themselves against the world. And we lived in a number of little houses in Cambridge, and they put up a big red fence so that we was completely shut out from the rest of the world. You mentioned we had no connections, we had no newspapers, no television or anything like that. And then around when I was about 9 years old.
Sorry, do you mind me jumping in one more time?
Not at all.
Real quick. I just want to mention, just for our viewers out there, because we have a wide Catholic audience and non-Catholic audience too. We have a lot of Protestants who watch our channel, and they always say, what does it mean that there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church? And even today, there's many extreme Catholics on our channel who hold to Feenyism. And what that basically means is that the only Catholics will be in heaven. If you're not a Catholic, you're going straight to hell. And that doesn't even matter if you've never heard of Jesus or if you've never even heard of the Catholic Church. It doesn't matter. You're simply just all going to hell. It's such a radical extremism, so much so that he even goes against the Catholic Church by saying that all infants who weren't baptized go straight to hell. So even though Pope Pius, I believe it was the 9th, said that nobody goes to hell unless, not without a willful, intentional sin of their own, which babies can't do. And he basically called Pope Pius IX a moron. And but his extremism led him to say that all babies who aren't baptized and basically anyone who's not Catholic is going to hell. And the Catholic Church condemned that and condemned him. And there's many Catholics today who still teach this. They say, if you're not Catholic in the Catholic Church, baptized a Catholic, then you're going to hell. And the Catholic Church simply does not teach that. Yes, we have a doctrine called no salvation outside the Catholic Church, but that has to be understood properly. And Father Feeney brought it to its extreme, which is what got him excommunicated into hot water. And then now he's building fences around because he's right and everyone else is wrong.
Oh, yes, that's it in a nutshell. And eventually, but then what happened when I was 6 years old? So there were now 100 people in this community, 60 grown men and women, among whom were 12 married couples and 39 children. I was the oldest in my family, so I was right, at the beginning of the center, kind of being estranged from the Catholic Church, but had 4 younger siblings. And when I was 6 years old, the children were separated from their parents, and then the parents were forced to take vows of celibacy. In other words, forced to give up one of the sacraments and adopt a vow of celibacy, which was not their vocation. It's never been truly understood the force behind that. But once we left Cambridge and moved out to Harvard, Massachusetts, we then became really, in essence, a monastic existence. We had to live in a monastic existence. Silence was the rule. The little girls were called little sisters, the women big sisters, thus the title of my book. The children, the little girls, were not allowed to speak to the little boys. We were not allowed to speak to our parents. The grown men and women could not speak to each other. And it was ruled by that woman, Catherine Clark, who was now called Sister Catherine. Everyone had a religious name. And so my parents, who had been known as Betsy and Jim, became Sister Elizabeth Ann and Brother James Aloysius. And that was the only way I was allowed to address them. And we were not allowed to speak to our parents except for about 45 minutes every 3 or 4 months, when Sister Catherine would make an announcement that there would be, a community meeting. Didn't even talk about families, a community meeting. And that was when each of us, the families, got together. My parents went along with this, I think, in large measure, because they really believed that dogma of the Catholic Church. And it caused a lot of pain, but ultimately we did reunite. But when I was about 14 or 15, I knew that all of the children were expected to live the life of the community, and that we had been told that we were the luckiest children in the world because we had promised to God from our infancy, which meant that I was going to become a nun the way my mother had and the way all the grown women were. But my own little fantasy was that I was going to, have a prince come along and sweep me off, and we would go up and live in a castle and have lots of children. Not that I knew how any of those things might happen. And so I just had this wonderful fantasy world. And along about the time I was 13, 14 years old, I started getting crushes. And that was very much contrary to what Sister Catherine wanted. And there were some challenges that we had. And at one point, the local authorities were suggesting that maybe we weren't being educated as appropriately as we might in the public schools. And so Sister Catherine was desperate not to let us go into the public school system. And she had me apply to both Vassar and to Bates College, where my father had gone. I got into both. And on that basis, the school was accredited. But then I had to write a letter telling each of those colleges I would not be attending, because as Sister Catherine said, it would cause me to lose my soul if I had attended those colleges. So when I was about 15 and 16 and 17 and had these crushes, to her, that was a sign that I was a danger to the rest of the community. And so she kicked me out. She allowed me to finish high school, and within 2 hours, of graduating from high school, I was whisked away. My parents were aware of it. My siblings were not aware of it. And she then told me I was not invited back. And she allowed me, she would pay for me to go to secretarial school so that I would then be able to support myself and live on my own and be out of her hair. And that's exactly what I did too. Very interestingly, only 2 years after she kicked me out, she died at the age of 67. And when she died, that was one of the things that much later led me to really understand that it was a cult. She was the only glue that held the place together. She was more than the power behind the throne of Father Feeney. And so the place began to crumble.
Well, can I ask?
Yes.
First of all, that sounds like they forced religious life on everybody, whether you wanted it or not, which is wrong. But second of all, what was the reason that you ended up getting kicked out?
Well, the way Sister Catherine described it, I was a threat to the vocations of the men. I, who didn't even know what a crush meant. Sister Catherine had never prepared any of us for the real world, for marriage, because she never expected that we would live any life but the one that was there. I was completely naive as to why I was so interested and attracted to boys. But she saw me as a threat. And so she got rid of me.
Okay.
And that really ends the first book. And I wasn't going to write another book. And then people said, oh my goodness, you had a wonderful career. I said, oh, for goodness sake, so many people have great careers. And they said, no, but there's a wonderful arc to the story of having been kicked out, as you well said, having never, seen a television show, not having a clue what the name of a single Hollywood actor was. I couldn't even name a baseball player or, the Beatles, as far as Father Feeney was concerned, they created music of the devil. And so there I was being tossed out into this world. I had never heard a swear word. I'd never even heard a slang word. And I had no idea what the language was that people were talking about. And one day on the bus, the man turned to me very sweetly and softly, and he said, has anyone ever told you you look like Lauren Bacall? I didn't have a clue who Lauren Bacall was. And I remember thinking that I had to ask Sister Elizabeth Ann, who was Lauren Bacall? And when I did ask her, she was very sweet. And she said, oh, darling, she was a beautiful movie actress. And I remember thinking, wow, somebody thinks I'm beautiful. We were never told whether you were pretty or whether you were successful or whether you were a good sportswoman or anything. And so it was fascinating for me to make that migration from what was a completely sheltered life into slowly, learning about the world and being able to tiptoe first. And then my first job was as a receptionist. And I was so excited. All I wanted to do was be the best receptionist in the world. And my second book, Breaking Glass, is dedicated to the mentors that I had in the world of business, in the world of finance, in the world of Wall Street. They were all men, needless to say. There were so few women in that world. And I am eternally grateful to them. They came in different sizes and shapes, and some of them were a lot older than I was. And I just can tell one little story. One of them was a guy named Stu Harvey, and he had hired me in 1974, an abysmal year in the stock market. The price of oil had quadrupled. Inflation was through the roof. Interest rates were rising. And he hired me as an analyst to cover the savings and loan industry. And about 6 weeks after I was there, this was in Boston. I had moved to Philadelphia for 2 years, had come back and was just finishing my degree, which I had got at Boston University, going at nights. And it took me 9 years. And I had just been there for 6 weeks and I was excited. It was tough, but I loved it. And one day I heard somebody talking to someone else and saying that we were about to be acquired. So I made a beeline for Stu Harvey's office and I said, are we being acquired? And he said, yes. He was very subdued. And I thought, uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. He just hired me. So I said, is this a case of last in, first out? And he said, I'm afraid so. And I was 25 years old, had just turned 25 and was so excited. And this tear came down my face. And he was so sweet. He was a rough and tumble kind of guy, big gruff voice. And he just said, please don't cry. You'll make me cry. So I just went to my office, and half an hour later, he came and he said, I can't get you a job, but I can get you an interview. And he sent me down to New York. And I had a full day of interviews the next day. And at the end of the day, I was offered a job with a big raise to $17,500 and came back home to Boston, went into his office the next morning and said, they offered me a job. I think he already knew. And I said, I'm so excited. On the other hand, I just moved back to Boston. My family's all here. I said, what should I do? And this gruff voice came and said, do you want to make it big in this world? I said, yes, of course. And he said, go to New York. And so I had that job for less than 3 months. And the man that ran that small company basically kicked me out of the nest and sent me to New York, which was a giant step in the right direction. So those were some of the kinds of stories and the importance of having mentors. And I learned through those mentors to be adaptable. And adaptability to me was extremely valuable because when you do what others want and need, then you build up confidence with new skills that you get. And with confidence comes the ability to be resilient, because there are lots of ups and downs in whatever path one is taking to a full career.
And that's like the opposite of what you grew up with, like where there was no adaptability, nothing but black and white. And basically the people in charge determine what's black and white. And, I would wonder what that did to your psyche. And if you struggled with things even after you left, like, I don't know, like, you realized it was a cult, but how did that impact you going down your career? Or did you just kind of like leave it all behind and all these new people, you just kind of latched onto the people who mentored you?
Well, I was one of the last people that really saw it as a cult, because to me, it was my home. And while there are many things I wish had not happened, it was hard for me to think of my own home as being a cult. And it was my own 20-year-old daughter who came home from college one weekend when I was in the middle of writing my book. And she said, Mom, I have 2 things to tell you. She said, first, you've got to drop everything until you finish this book. And second, you have to accept the fact that you were raised in a cult. And it was my 20-year-old daughter telling me that. And I just opened up my eyes and saw it all in a very, very different way. Because home, regardless of the environment that you're in, there's a special place called home. And in many ways, I loved my upbringing. Did I love the fact that I couldn't talk to my parents? Of course not. That was tragic. But when my parents left after Sister Catherine died, I will tell you, as the family of 7 again, 5 children and 2 adults, and we were all now young adults, there was never a harsh word. I think we all understood that there was a great amount of manipulation. And we never fought over why did you do this or anything like that. And I think that's been one of the blessings for our family.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that follow-up question. I was going to ask if any of your family kind of like regretted it or apologized or blamed each other or, any of those things, but it doesn't sound like they did. So that's really good. And it sounds like you had a really good relationship after that. I would imagine something like that would bring you closer together.
Well, particularly, I think, because my parents also saw the evil of that way, but they knew that they had been manipulated. And I don't know, it was very hard to hold it against them. While they obeyed the rules, my father in particular went out of his way to break the rules sometimes. And on my birthday, we never celebrated birthdays, but on my birthday, he always found me and he would just whisper, "Happy birthday, my little princess." And he had 4 daughters and 1 son. All 4 daughters he called my little princess.
That's beautiful. And beautiful. And my heart goes out to all people in cults, and, religious or otherwise. And I pray for them. I definitely pray for them that they can see and get out. And a lot of the work we do here at Catholic Truth is to help people do that, which is one of the reasons we're doing this interview, which is one of the reasons we try to expose radical traditionalism, anything brought to the extreme where just we become our own pope, judge, procurator, and everybody else is wrong. It's never a good, place to be. It reminds me of girls who are in abusive relationships with guys, and everyone, their friends, their family, everyone around them is telling them this guy is bad news. And this girl's, no, you don't know him like I do. He's this, he's that. He's like, nobody knows him like I do. I know him and nobody else does. And like that is like a big red flag. And even in religion, if people are telling you, hey, be careful, hey, look out, and you're like, no, I know everything, and you know nothing. So it's a very scary, prideful place to be.
Yes, yes. And there were some insecurities that I had when I left. First was language and just acclimating myself. I think I had, the social awareness of a 2-year-old when I was, 17 and kicked out. But I also, for a while, had a kind of imposter syndrome. It was like maybe I wasn't really smart. Maybe it was that I was just these tiny little classes. And so I applied to the Harvard Business School. And when I got into the Harvard Business School, I really said, okay, people don't flunk out of the Harvard Business School. So I decided maybe I wasn't dumb after all. But one of my mentors was a Harvard Business School professor. And I was having second thoughts about going to the Harvard Business School because it was in the late 70s. And while my family was all out, I still felt as though I was the primary breadwinner for the family. And if there was ever a crisis, it would fall to me to be able to handle whatever financial situation came up. And I was at the Ford Foundation at the time in the investment department. And the Harvard professor that was a consultant to the Ford Foundation was a guy named Jay Light. And it was the late 70s. And I told him I was having this, I've been very excited when I was accepted and had even resigned from the Ford Foundation. And then I said, I'm having second thoughts because, I don't know where the money's going to come from. And he was so wonderful to me. And he said, you know what? If you want to change your career entirely, and I was a machinery analyst at the time, so I covered Caterpillar Tractor and John Deere, big machinery companies. He said, if you want to run one of those companies, if you want to go up the corporate ladder, the Harvard Business School will be wonderful for you. But if you love what you do and you want to continue as an analyst and then maybe become a portfolio manager, he said, you're already a success. You don't need the Harvard Business School. It was the best and most wonderful piece of advice he gave me. And I put him as one of my mentors. He went on to become the dean of the Harvard Business School some 20 years later. And sadly, only died recently. I would have loved to have shared with him that he was one of my mentors in my book. But those are the kinds of people and the kinds of advice I sought and received. So for me, adaptability is so important, but so is the power of a mentor. And role models and mentors are very different things. And I had someone recently tell me I had a terrible mentor. I said, no. You didn't have a mentor. Mentors are always good things. And role models can be different. And sometimes people have said to me, well, how? You grew up in this cloistered environment. You come into the world, you don't even know. I mean, I've never held a dollar bill before I was 18 years old. And now I'm in this world of money. And, how is it that, you managed to, get through all of that? And I really attribute it to the mentors that I had. But Sister Catherine, who was never a mentor to me, she was subliminally, quite obviously, a role model. Because my whole life, from the time I was an infant till she kicked me out, I watched one woman run a community of 100 people, men, women, and children. And regardless of what she said and did and ordered, no one ever, ever, ever pushed back on her. And I think when I went into this completely male world of, dog eat dog finance, I think I was never, people have said, well, weren't you afraid of, projects or, you didn't know anything about this. I think that role model of being unafraid of anything and doing things till she got it the way she wanted it was there for me. And I was never afraid that being a woman meant I couldn't succeed. So I have to give her some credit. She wasn't a person who dispensed love, but she did help me.
I also would note that she probably would have made a good CEO, as many CEOs are like that, kind of fashion it to their own liking, and it's their way, the highway. But I do wonder.
Successorship is important, and she didn't provide that at all. She never expected to die so young, and there was nothing built. There was no foundation. The place just crumbled, and they eventually, reconnected with the Catholic Church, and they split into separate groups, and they were, scatter groups all over the country. And there's still, a Benedictine abbey up there in Harvard and a sisters group. They're all still very, very much aligned with the very conservative interpretation of no salvation outside the Catholic Church, but that's their prerogative. I'm so blessed with the kind of Pope we have right now, who to me, represents Christ's teaching, the corporal works of mercy, the spiritual works of mercy. And it seems to me that my grace is to try to live my life as much along the lines of the great people that followed in Jesus's footsteps. And I love to think about someone like Mother Teresa. She never criticized or, rejected anyone. And to me, that's living the spirit. And I think we have in this Pope a wonderful human being who finds the good in people rather than the bad in people.
Right. I mean, he still, is Catholic. He still teaches Catholic teachings, but he's not a jerk about it. He's actually like, you can still be Catholic. You can still believe what the Catholic Church teaches, but you can also still love people, even people you disagree with, even people that you might, that even might hate the Catholic Church. I mean, here at Catholic Truth, we have people yelling at us every day, telling us we're going to hell, telling us we're a cult, telling us we're this, we're telling us we're that. And we just say, you know what? Thank you for your comment. We love you and we pray for you. We try to love everybody no matter who they are. Even if we hold to Catholic teachings, we believe that it should be done in love and humility.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was just saying, not criticizing everyone, but finding the good in them. And I'm an optimist by nature. I suppose I better be, given where I came from and what I had to face. And so for me, I always try to find the good story. And I used to think, I want to have a news station and we only tell good news. And I thought, well, that won't last very long. People are really drawn to bad stories and crises and things like that. But it's lovely. And I do a lot of writing and I write blogs and stuff. And I like to tell the good news stories of people who've been successful in doing something that was very special, whether it's running a restaurant or, just taking care of other children, whatever it is. It's a lovely way to feel good about people.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. Amen. And I'm glad you're doing that. We need more of that. We need less news media just capitalizing on everybody's, abominations and catastrophes just to make money, just to make the news headlines. But we need more people saying, here's all the good that's happening in the world today. And in some sense, that's why I started a second YouTube channel called Catholic Truth Living. And I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and many people say, oh, are you going to get rid of her, get rid of her? You don't want a Down syndrome baby, do you? And honestly, she's been the biggest blessing in the whole entire world. She's the happiest, snuggliest, just most beautiful smile is so contagious, and everyone around her's life, she changes. And I want to emphasize that. And I want to showcase that to the world, that everybody's a person and everyone has gifts and everyone has value and everyone can change the world no matter who you are. And she's already changing the world, and she's 1.5. And she's already changing our lives and everyone around her.
I've heard the stories and known people who've also had children, special needs children, and they've always said what a grace it was to have that child. And so I admire you. I'm sure you have lots of worries for the years ahead, and it's wonderful though to see you have such strong faith and take joy in something that a lot of others might take sorrow in.
Yeah, and I want to take that joy and I want to bring it to the world. I want to show it to the world. And I want to be like, this is what we can have. Like they're teaching us things. They're just so pure, innocent, perfect, good, non-judgmental, non-hateful. They don't look at people by race or by this or by that. They just love. And we could all imagine if the world was more like that. I mean, we could all learn that lesson.
Well, I'll make a little, plug for myself. I do write blogs and columns, and they're all on my website. And so I wanted to give my website so that people can see those. Is that okay?
Yes, plug whatever you want for yourself.
So it's Patricia Chadwick, pretty simple, patriciachadwick.com. And it has also lots of interviews from both my first book. Now my second book is just starting out. So hopefully I'll have your YouTube and link, and I can put it on as well. But I really love to tell good news stories, and so I do that once a month. I write a story about something. Sometimes it's the economy. I mean, that's kind of also what I know as well. So I think that and people can go through that to find my book, and you can also get it at your local bookstore. You'll have to ask them to probably. It's just the book's out only a week, less than a week, and so you might have to ask them to get it, or you can certainly order it online as well. I am actually doing the recording of the book, and that will be out in about a month.
Okay.
I record it myself, so that was kind of fun. I hadn't done that before. But both books will be on the website.
Now, let me ask you before you leave, why were you called the Witch of Wall Street?
So it was a moniker that I found I had only 5 years ago. So I'm 75 years old today, now. But 5 years ago, some friends were having a 70th birthday party for me. And I had, 80 friends. I was so excited. And one of the women got up with a microphone and told the story about how she was working for Bear Stearns. And the head of institutional sales brought her into his office and said, we have Citibank. It's a big account. There's one woman who manages a lot of the money there, but she's difficult. And I don't deny that I broke a little bit of China along the way. But he said, all the men are afraid of her. But here she's telling this story, and I'm hearing it for the first time at the age of 70. And she said, she was telling this audience, she said, I'd heard of this woman, but I'd never met her. She was 10 years older than I was. And she's saying, I was only 27, and at that time I was 37. And she said, all I knew was down on the trading desk, they referred to her as the Witch of Wall Street. I nearly fell on the floor. I could not believe that I was called the Witch of Wall Street. I mean, I knew I was very aggressive, and but I thought about it and was dismayed. And then over the last few years, as I was writing the second book, I thought about it and said, the characteristics that are considered leadership in a man, aggressiveness, perfectionism, impatience, attention to detail, they consider him a leader when he has it. And maybe he can be called the Wolf of Wall Street. But when a woman displays them, sometimes she's called the Witch of Wall Street. And I decided eventually to take it as a badge of honor. I think that I had a lot of energy and a lot of drive, and I think that can sometimes be threatening. And so I decided to embrace it. And I'm happy that I have, because actually I kind of think it's a lot of fun now to be called the Witch of Wall Street.
Well, good for you, good for you and for your success and for all that you've done, and the fact that you're writing good things and trying to, bring goodness into the world. That's wonderful. And I will link your article down below what your website down below where people can find your articles.
Wonderful.
And I will put it in our YouTube description. And if I remember, I'll put it also in our podcast description as well. But thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I wish you luck in the success of your book sales.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lovely conversation.
It was our pleasure. And I want to thank all of you out there who have watched as well. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching to the end. Please check out her information and her website below, and check out some of those good news articles. We all need a little good news in our life. And even today on my Alexa show, it came up. They're like, do you want some good news? And if you push it, it gives you the good news for today. So I said, okay. And so we all need that. So check out Patricia's website, and also her books, Little Sister and Breaking the Glass Wall. Is that what it is?
Breaking glass.
Breaking glass.
Glass ceiling. Breaking glass.
Yes.
From the subtitle, Tales from the Witch of Wall Street.
That's it. And we will link those below as well. So thank you so much, Patricia. God bless you.
Thank you ever so much. Really enjoyed it.